At Quite the Thing Media, we aim to bring you the best podcasts produced by independent creators, made without constraints.
This is Dave from the Beer in Front podcast. Join Podcast Father on this journey, sharing great things all sorts of creators are doing. He's the indie podcaster.
You've been searching for a podcast. Want to know about some great artists? You've come to the right place. Indie Podcaster with your host, the Podcast Father.
You are starting another episode of Indie Podcaster. I'm your host, Jeff, a.k.a. Podcast Father. Claire Sandomal joins me again. She's a producer for 48 Hours and creator and host of Final Days on Earth podcast. Thank you for joining me yet again.
Thanks, Jeff. Glad to be here.
You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray.
Well, I'm glad I can fulfill that need for you in your life.
And it's a rainy day, so I'm glad to spend a little time with you and talk a little podcasting. We're going to talk about Bad Scripts podcast today with Steve and Mike.
Yeah, what a unique idea for a podcast. I think there's all sorts of podcasts out there, and I have never heard of one like this before.
Well, basically what happened is they wrote all these script plays nearly 20 years ago, and they're breaking them out and reading them. And it is a fun time. You get in this interview, they also talk about how they've changed as, men and people, and their personalities have changed some from when they wrote these scripts 20 years ago.
It's kind of like a time capsule. Like they wrote something and then they, as they say, untouched and unread for nearly 2 decades. I bet they never thought it would turn into a podcast, but if they could have reverse engineered it, it's a pretty cool idea to get to have that time capsule experience.
Do you have, they had theirs hit, packed away in an attic. Do you have any scripts like under the floorboard or something that you wrote 20 years ago?
Probably not from 20 years ago, but maybe. But I definitely have things that I'll noodle on and I'll put away because I'm like, I'm not ready for this yet, and come back to. So I think that's a creative person's trait, to write on some stuff and let it sit around for a while and see if something comes of it.
I can see the one you wrote 20 minutes ago. It says, "Go to hell, Jeff. You're driving me nuts." You haven't packed that one away yet, though. I can see that.
I do a better job of hiding those types of things.
All right. Well, hey, I hope everybody enjoys this interview with the Bad Scripts podcast, Steve and Mike. Before we get into that, let me take care of a little business. Jeff here. I want to talk about a few things that keep this podcast going. If you like the work that I'm doing, I encourage you to share it with a friend. That really is the best way to spread the word about Indie Podcaster. I would love it if you would go to your favorite podcast listening platform, may it be a Apple or Good Pods, and leave me a rating. Throw me some stars if you would like. All that word of mouth and sharing and reviews of this podcast does help. This podcast and myself are a proud member of Quite the Thing Media. Quite the Thing Media, podcasts that speak to you. Go check out all the great independent creators from around the world. It is a community-based podcast network. Check it out. It's great. QuiteTheThingMedia.com. If you want to check out my page, it's QuiteTheThingMedia.com/podcastfather. You can request a review from me on site or submit a form to participate on this very podcast. Check it out. I highly encourage you to download and listen to your podcast on the Good Pods app. This app is awesome. You can see what your friends and influencers are listening to. They've got groups for all your interests. I've got 2 groups I highly suggest you check out. I've got the Indie Podcast group. I've also got the True Crime Obsession group. If you're an indie podcaster, Good Pods is for you. They've done crazy amount of things these last couple months to reach out and help indie podcasters. They've got tip jars on there for your podcast. They've got performance charts that are based just on independent podcasts. Make sure you download the app and check it out. Podpage is a proud sponsor of this podcast. Podpage is an amazing resource to build your podcast website. You want them big search engine hits. You want to be out there. You want to leave your mark in the digital world. And this website makes it extremely easy to do that. You can set up your podcast website in just a few minutes. Make sure you check it out, podpage.com. That's enough of all that. Let's jump into this awesome interview. Steve and Mike from Bad Scripts podcast. These are guys that I really came across I don't know, maybe after just a few weeks or 1 or 2 weeks on Twitter. One of the first indie podcasters that I met up with. So just thrilled to meet you guys face to face here. Well, but audio form for the interview, but we are on Zoom. So I'm actually getting to see them. It's kind of weird when you interact with people for an extended amount of time and you don't really know what they look like, or in your case, didn't even know what I sounded like. But anyways, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'll let you guys give an introduction to yourselves, and then let's go into how this podcast started, because that's a really interesting story to me.
Mike, do you want to take the reins first? Because I normally on the podcast I do a lot of the talking, so I'll let you give a little bit of a background of who we are.
Yeah, so I'm Mike, and thanks very much, Jeff, for having us on today. And I live in Scotland, as you know. I'm really bad with accents, as you know, and we come from a performing arts background, and now we're working stiffs, and we're trying to reconnect with our entertainment origins through the use of this medium. So, it's currently quite a cloudy day over here. Unfortunately, we get 2 days of good weather in Scotland. That's me. I'm Mike.
And I'm Steve. I live in England still, about 300 miles south of where Mike does. And we've known each other since we were entertainers. We started working together and living together at a resort in England in 1999. And we've been good friends ever since.
I'm trying not to mess up the whole backstory here, but the podcast is Bad Scripts, if anybody didn't pick that up on my intro. You guys are digging into your old scripts, right? Give us the cliff notes of the whole thesis of this podcast, because to me, it's crazy.
Well, I think it came from a conversation we had last year where I was in the attic and I came across these scripts, and I called Steve and said, "You're never going to guess what I found. I've just found these 3 parts that we wrote when we were 23." And wouldn't it be fun to read them again, have a drink, and just read them on? And it could be absolutely terrible. And Steve, I think you took that away and you thought about it, and then you contacted me with a different idea, which I'll let you introduce.
Yeah, so I think we give a little bit of backstory then about why we wrote the scripts. I guess. I mean, we'd worked together at a British holiday resort, and we decided when we'd left there and we were struggling actors trying to get jobs, trying to make it as entertainers, that we'd go down the Stallone route of trying to write our own piece that we could then appear in, and and make it big, in inverted commas. So we sat down. We were living up in the north of England near Manchester. And we decided to sit down in a McDonald's, drink some coffee, and write this script about the things that we'd experienced and our friends had, and maybe exaggerate that a little. But we thought there was so much fun things that had happened that maybe people would enjoy it. Mike had done some writing with the company before around a sitcom that it never quite worked out, but he had a connection there.
Materialized. It never went anywhere, unfortunately.
but we had a connection there, so we thought, well, we'll write this and we'll send it to them and see what they think. So we did that. We wrote the script and we sent it off, and they sort of came back to us and said, we kind of like it, but what you've done is like 3-hour-long episodes, and really we need to have smaller and episodes and more of them. And being 23 years old, we just went, oh, okay. And we put it in the attic and left it. And then we went off and did other things with our lives. And it wasn't until last year that Mike dug those out of the attic and found them. And I said, let's record what we do. Let's maybe put it down on audio and we can hear it. And then that just sort of organically turned into us doing a podcast for it. And we thought, let's give it a go. Maybe some of the people we used to work with would enjoy hearing the stories. And we thought maybe 2 or 3 people had listened, but it seems to have captured a few people's imagination, and we've had a few listeners, so it's been good fun.
Steve, you came up with most of the actual podcast platform idea to take the scripts.
Yeah. I think.
Do you know? I think we when we first started out, or when we first started talking about it, we didn't really know what to do with it, and we couldn't understand. Do we just read it line by line? Do we just talk about it? So to land on a format was the hardest part of it all, actually, and to try and make it entertaining enough. And I think, and you'll hear it certainly through the episodes. So when we got to about episode 3, we kind of found our format and found our feet to say, you know what, we're just going to go for it. We're going to perform the characters. We're going to do the accents. We're going to do as much as we can. But it took a little while to get there, I think, even for me and Steve to agree on that as well. So
we couldn't decide whether do we play it straight and just perform it straight out as like a radio play, or do we just read it straight like a script? So it was kind of difficult to work out. So we just went with it, and we said, let's not take ourselves too seriously. We were 23 years old. We were young guys. We didn't know what we were doing really. So let's just have a little fun with ourselves, and that's kind of where it all came from.
Have a little fun with ourselves. That sounds really wrong, Steve.
Well, you know me, I like to put my foot in it whenever I can. My innuendos are legendary.
Well, I will say the voice actors in this podcast are great. And like you alluded to a while ago, all the different characters, it had to be like a little bit of you just had to put it all aside and just let it go, like Mike was saying. Was it hard not to critique yourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly the early part, I said, Steve, I'm not enjoying listening to these, just because it's so cringy. Listening to yourself, trying to convey something, But yeah, I think that there was a sense of certainly, and this is a reveal. I reveal far too much about myself through the podcast, and I realized and committed to the fact that there's more story that sits behind what we wrote that I wanted to convey and talk about. It's been a form of therapy for me, I think, just to kind of talk about all that stuff as well. But with the accents, I know I'm terrible at them, and I got to the point where if I cared about how that was being perceived, it wouldn't work. I just have to go for it.
Yeah, and you genuinely did have a little crisis of confidence after about the 3rd episode, and was like, I'm really worried about this. And I think we just sort of sat down and said, look, just enjoy it. Just throw it out there. We do the accents because there's the two of us, and there's so many different characters to try and bring to life. We wanted to have a way to differentiate between them. So British accents, you can go 10 miles down the road and you've got a different accent. So there was quite a lot to choose from in quite a small area. So that was kind of a key driver for it. But Mike was very brave to then just sort of embrace it and go, I don't care if it sounds awful, have fun with that, enjoy it. And we decided that, we were going to just open ourselves up to criticism if it meant that, or just have fun with it,
I think that there's a lot of laughter and other things that, that would indicate that you're not taking yourselves too serious. So obviously it's to be critical of it is to be critical of, kind of comedy.
I think there's a high degree of trust in there as well, between me and Steve, and we have to trust each other for this kind of thing as well, because we are, I mean, look, we're recording our own work as well. So, but we're also capturing stories, and there's a lot of things that's really happening. I'm sure if you've listened to some of the specials we've done, people have come in and gone, was that me? Were you capturing my story there? We've dealt with that very sensitively, and there is a few real people in there. There's a few real situations mixed in, but I think to allow an audience to feel connected to what we're talking about, I think we just have to be ourselves, and we just have to be honest with it. And like you said, I'm not taking it seriously. I'm having great fun with it. But you'll know from recording podcasts, it's actually a terrifying thing to do, because you're trying to entertain people for what is 45 minutes to an hour and not get too self-involved.
I agree, and like Mike, you briefly touched on. It's not like we're reviewing someone else's work or talking about a bad movie. This is the stuff that we did. So you kind of feel like doubly exposed, and that was always a worry. People might hate the podcast, but they also might hate our work as well. So it's like, oh, what do we do? But fortunately, we haven't had much in the way of negative feedback. So we're enjoying doing it.
I'm proud to announce that the podcast father, myself, Jeff, and Podpage are teaming up for this sponsorship. Podpage is great, guys. Like I was telling you earlier, it is so critical to have an actual podcast website. I know the link trees are used a lot, but you need an actual website. You need something that's going to show up in Google. You need something that's going to show some hits, a trail that will lead to your podcast. And there's not a better way to do it than Podpage. You can build a beautiful podcast website in 5 minutes. Automatically create a listener-friendly podcast site from your RSS feed. Customize the design to create a professional look you'll be proud of in just a few clicks. There is no coding or technical knowledge necessary. There's a free trial to give this a shot, and there's different packages ranging from free to all the goods and gadgets, but still at affordable prices. Podpage is big supporters of indie podcasts, so make sure you support them also. Go on podpage.com and get your podcast website set up. With that being said, we will roll into this segment sponsored by Podpage, where we will play a trailer from a different indie podcast every episode. I hope you enjoy it and give them a listen after you're done listening to my show. Then afterwards, we'll jump back into the interview.
I'm Dawn. And I'm Cole. And Scottish Murders is a true crime podcast dedicated to people from or living in Scotland.
Just like anywhere else in the world, these murders can be truly horrific and shocking, and we want to shine more light upon them.
Join us every 2 weeks on Scottish Murders, where we'll bring you cases both solved and unsolved, giving you an insight into the other side of bonnie Scotland.
Find us wherever you stream your podcasts, as well as on social media.
Join us there. Bye!
Can you see just by reading the scripts how you have grown and changed as people in this and as this time's passed? Just by the way you wrote back then?
I think so, and I think we addressed that in a recent episode, the video episode that we did. We had a guest on, Dan, and she said, "You write bad for the girls. You didn't give them any depth, the character of the girls." And it was like, yeah, we didn't, and we can see that now that we wrote from a male perspective because that was the viewpoint we had, and when we read it back now, we cringe a little and go, we should have created more 3-dimensional characters for the female members of the cast. But we at the time, the young naive us didn't even take that into consideration. I think some of the language around some of the characters as well. There's some mild homophobia from one of the characters. Not done maliciously, but it's a difficult subject that when you go back to 1999 and what was an acceptable way of behaving and to what is now, we probably, if we wrote it now, wouldn't have done that because I don't think it would have sat with an audience as well as it does now. It feels like very much like an observation of a time, whereas now it would feel like a political statement, and that's not us, you know. So that's kind of, I think they're the main things we pulled out of our review of it when we've gone back over. And as we've said in the podcast, we didn't read ahead. We could have got the script, read through it before we did it. We said sealed book. We read it as we turn the page. We record it. So it was pure honesty, and that's probably our excuse for why the acting was a little ropey at times, because we were just going with the live table read. You know.
I think if we wrote now, it would come from a place of being less selfish. We wrote it as a vehicle for ourselves, and you can tell that with the way that we highlight certain characters. So we've talked about this already. I was definitely wanting to play Adam. And Steve and I really disagreed over that one character actually when we wrote it, because I was writing him like the most perfect man you've ever met, and Steve and Steve actually challenged me on that. So no, look, he's not great. And then reading it back now, and then hearing him, he sounds absolutely mental. He's not the nicest guy. There's definitely something going on with him. I would say Steve's right. Steve obviously wanted to play Dan, and he's the one that makes the biggest change, and he makes the biggest, he takes that turn as the character. I think if we wrote that now, it would come from a more genuine place, whereas at the time, I think we were writing as a vehicle to try and sell ourselves.
Can you see your friendship in that writing as well in your relationship back then?
I don't think we do. I don't think we do see our friendship coming through in the show, because I don't think we wrote it in that kind of way. I think we wrote it as siloed. If we could sell something and at least then put ourselves in the mix to play the characters. And that's why I don't think I think there's certain bonds coming through in the script. I don't think there's tight bonds, not certainly the relationship that Steve and I had. We never play that through for some reason. I think that's a really good observation to make. And that's probably a miss that we had back then, that we never wrote it in that way.
Yeah, because we're definitely closer than any of the characters. And our wives will attest to that we are, that we speak probably every day. And we probably interact more with each other than we do with our own families. So the fact that the characters in the story, Adam and Dan, do get closer as we proceed through things, but I don't think it's quite on the same level as our bromance. We're very much like the characters in Scrubs, that kind of a friendship, that some people might call unhealthy, but we just call it love,
Caught in a bad bromance. That's what I say. Anyway, so when was the first episode released?
It was in the middle of February, wasn't it, Mike? If I think correctly, it's around the middle of February. We recorded a couple before we put any out, and I think we put sort of 2 out in the first week. And then I went, that's a lot of editing to do if we keep that level up. So we moved that back to the once a week is enough to put something out. And we managed to get, from our 3 scripts, I think 13 episodes we managed to do purely based on the scripts.
So when you first started out, a lot of times it's you're growing your audience with the basics, right? Like you have your family listening to it. How many episodes did it take really before it started to be just even a little bit more than that? Because I know that's the first thing you're going to do. The people your friends, your family, which is always the great place to start, because you also can get honest feedback. I might be afraid to tell you something wasn't too great, but your friend that you actually know personally, or your family, won't.
Yeah, 100%. We did have friends and family that listened into that first one, but we also had some channels into people we used to work with as well, who we hadn't seen for a long time or had any real communication with. But those guys that are in Facebook groups with you that you don't really you join the group, but you never really interact with them. You don't have the conversations. But we kind of put it out there and said, look, we've done this. If you remember those days and you want to have a listen, please do. What really surprised us was people listening from other parts of the world, really, from the States, from Australia, Indonesia, all over the place. Because we see it as it's a very British comedy, really. What we've done, there's a lot of very specific jokes and references that we didn't think anybody outside of our circle of friends would appreciate, but we see, we've had from our dashboards, it showed, over 20 states in the US that people have tuned in from and things. And it blows our minds that anybody would want to hear 2 crazy middle-aged guys rambling,
How many episodes was it really before you started seeing that, like it going, all the states popping up? And
I don't know, maybe I think about 8 or 9, maybe, I think, before we started to see those numbers going up. And I mean,
I came in on what was Fusion? Was that 8, 7? I'm trying to remember. I think that's about
something like that. Yeah,
that's about the time I came in, I think.
And what was your experience of that? Because we're very conscious it's a serialized podcast. So if you come in midway through, you've got that whole dilemma of going, I have to go back to the beginning to understand what's going on. Was that quite hard for you to do on that one, or did it just intrigue you to think, I want to see? And I suppose my question for you is, could you see a difference in our format? And I suppose as we strengthened and found a style.
I don't know. I don't want to do just the same thing every time. So I don't always want to start out at the beginning. So with you guys in particular, I think I came in around 7 and 8. Then I think I went back after that to 1, and you could definitely see from, even an editing piece, which is pretty common, right? You start learning tricks and trades of editing. but just from the confidence, you could definitely see a difference from 1 to 8. So I think I probably came in about the same time. It sounds like then it was kind of reaching out to other people around the world.
And that was, and Twitter's such a great thing, and the stuff that you do, we can only sort of tip our hat because we know from personal experience as indie podcasters how difficult it is. You've got your Joe Rogans of the world, you've got your Ricky Gervaises of the world that go out and they get millions of listens, and I'm not saying it's easy for them, but they have an established base and they have money and things to put into these things. We don't have that, and as an indie podcast community, having people like the Podcast Father and others around as a sort of support group for each other, it's been so important to give us confidence and to share the information around everything that you can do to help promote everybody else as well. I found since about that time that you mentioned, that's been a real key thing to give us confidence going forward and to push on and keep doing the podcast, has been knowing that there's a in inverted commas family out there that go through the same emotional journey as you do every time you release an episode, hoping that you'll see those numbers tick up, that people are actually tuning in,
I think the irony for me, going back to your point as well, Jeff, is I've got a twin sister. She lives in Australia, and we haven't lived together since she was 18 years old. She joined the army, and I started dancing in Lycra. Whole different story. And she actually messaged me because she listens, and she said, "I've learned more about you through this podcast than I have at any point in our life." And I think that for me just validated that view of, we're sharing stuff here, but she's enjoying listening to my journey and my story, which she never knew about.
That's awesome. And I can honestly see, and I think I always have a little bit of an emotional attachment to you guys, because you guys are one of the podcasts that I've seen really grow over the last couple of months, kind of in front of my eyes. So if that makes sense, I don't know if you agree with that or not, but I think that's why I always will relate to you guys, because I've seen where you've reached out to more people and you've kind of got more into the community than you were, I think, than when we first probably started conversing.
Yeah, and you've been incredibly supportive of us as well, with your reviews and helping us on our way. Because we're just two guys. We didn't know what we were doing in the podcast community, and I think that you do need help, and being brave enough to ask him for that help, which Steve's amazing at doing, is to reach out and start. Because Steve does a lot of marketing, Steve does a lot of editing. I just turn up and record, and I've got the easy job out of it all, actually. But I would say to you, thank you for supporting us and helping us on our way, and just giving us a call out, because you do need that. You can't just leave it to chance. And the fact that you enjoy it as well, and wrote some really nice words about us, was incredibly appreciated.
Well, that was it. That was our first ever review that we got, and we've had quite a few since. You sit there on tenterhooks waiting for someone to say something, because you genuinely don't know what the world thinks of things. And so to hear people enjoy something you've made, I think in any medium is always a massive part of why you do it. And while people are enjoying it, we want to keep doing it. So that's really been huge for us.
Pleasure is all mine. So keep up the great work. How much stuff do you guys have sitting around? Like I guess my question is, we look at Bad Scripts podcast. How long? What's the plan? What's the goal?
Well, this is the big question, because we have written other things, but because Last Resort, people have really, that's the script that we wrote. That's, people have really attached to the characters. We've had messages from people genuinely angry at the characters for things they've done, and it makes us laugh, because we're thinking they're just a figment of our imagination, but it reminds you of how people get with their soap operas, and the characters in things that they watch. So do we move on to one of the other things that we wrote that maybe wasn't as relatable? But we sat down and we chatted, and we've actually just started writing another season of it. We're going to write a whole new script, which is a challenge in itself, because a lot of what comes from this season has been the fact that we are critiquing what we wrote before. So it's really disingenuous to do that with something you wrote a few weeks ago because you're very aware that you're going to make it into a podcast. So
yeah,
we're hopefully going to try and pull in some guest audience members to listen in on the read. But in the meantime, we've just released a sort of spin-off episode to provide some content while we're doing the writing. Mike, if you want to explain what we're doing there.
Yeah, so we are choosing the favorite movies of our main characters, and we're watching the movies and then we're talking about them. So we've just done Dan, and Dan's favorite movie is the Jean-Claude Van Damme double impact, which I don't know if you've seen, Jeff. We recently watched it and we talked about it at large, and it is an absolutely crazy movie. It is. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. It's just Jean-Claude Van Damme playing himself twice. And the next one we're going to do is actually Staying Alive, which we're going to be recording on Monday, which is Kelly's favorite movie. And then we're going to continue onwards. And I think it just gives a little bit of a different viewpoint without kind of dragging it out too much. I think it just means we can talk about some other things. The character can introduce it and talk about why. It gives us a chance to talk about some of these early, anything before 1999 movies that people, it might get people watching them again for to join in and stuff. But we are going to write another season of Last Resort. We've got an off season coming up, so it's what happens afterwards, because we left it on a cliffhanger, and then we'll see where that goes to. And I don't think we have any plans beyond that. We've got 2 seasons already mapped out, so the off season and then the actual season, and we're going to introduce some new characters as well.
Yeah, it's awesome. I think it's definitely a challenge though to write something and then focus on the podcasting piece as well. So you're embarking on a whole new journey, a whole new challenge.
Yeah, the challenge is trying to put ourselves back into that mindset as well, because I think if we write, people grow over time. It's been 16 years. We're different people. Trying to write how we was back then, we'll know very quickly whether it's going to work or not. And if it doesn't work, then with all things podcast, you can easily pivot and try something different. And then if people don't want to listen to it anymore, we'll try something else, and gather all of the skills we've learned of making podcasts and being part of that community.
Father Time is catching up. Yeah, I had to use Father Time. I figured you'd like that. Father Time is kind of catching up with us as we wind down on this interview a little bit. We still have some time, but there's one thing I've been asking everybody, and I'd like to hear your guys' answer and advice on it. What advice would you give creators just starting out that they wanted to start something like a podcast or take maybe some of their art public, anything a content creator really? What advice would you give them as they're starting out?
For me, it would be take that leap. You can prepare and you can fine tune anything. The longer you leave it, won't make it necessarily better. It's better to be brave, go out there and do your thing, and then get that feedback, and then rework it and make things better as you go along. Don't be frightened to put yourself out there, because the people that succeed are the ones that failed several times before, but they found their way and they found their route. And for me, that's key. I've hesitated in doing a lot of things in life. This hasn't been one of them, and it's purely been a joy to be involved in. So just be brave and be honest.
So it kind of helps you out more than just, sorry, Mike. Steve, it kind of helps you out more than just podcasting. That's what you're saying. This podcast journey has helped you out in life.
100%. A new level of confidence, as we're both in our 40s now, and early 40s, but 40s nonetheless. And I think you get to a point where you go, has that ship sailed? Is this it now? And this is what I do. No, it's never too late to do something new, or to revisit old habits or old hobbies, and to just go out there and do it. And it has given me new vigor. I know, Mike, we talked about this between ourselves, and you've definitely felt that, a change in your personality outside of the podcast that comes, and an openness that comes with that, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I've found myself again. I've found my sense of humor, and I've gone.
I
think his internet dropped, I think.
I think he was touching up, though, on what you just said, where be yourself. And I think for Mike in particular, I could see that confidence through his character readings. You asked me earlier, did you see a change? Yeah, I think you see a really big change in Mike from episode 1 to where you're at now. I think for him personally, you could definitely see it. And I think it kind of also shows your guys' friendship.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that people have said, is that you can tell it's a genuine friendship because we almost have a symbiotic way of thinking that we know where the other one's going. But we've got a very similar sense of humor and things like that. So it does flow a little easier because you know how that person will react to something you say. And I know through things I've dropped little jokes in, and I know that Mike will hear that and pick up on it, and I don't have to wonder about that. So it definitely helps in that process, or it has been really useful to do. So work with someone that you love and it's easier. That's, I guess, would have been Mike's input. I think his batteries died, unfortunately, on his laptop, which is why he's disappeared on us.
It's all right. We'll leave that in there. I like the dramatic moment where he said, "And I'm gone." I heard it. I don't know if you did. I heard it. He said, "And I'm gone," and he was gone.
He has a penchant for the dramatic. What can I say?
Amazing. Definitely leaving that in there. But no, I think that it's also probably really cool for your guys' friendship. And it's a good thing living, you said 300 miles away, so you can't just go see each other every day. This is another way to keep in touch and bond, and I think that's cool.
100%, because with the way things are around the world, visiting people's been difficult for a good while. So we've not seen each other in nearly 2 years now, which never normally happens. But we're remedying that very soon, and we're contemplating maybe doing a live stream when we are together or something, to try and just celebrate and embrace that too. So that'll all be part of the fun, I guess.
Sounds bromantic. All right, I'll give you a minute here to tell everybody where to find you guys. Well, I mean, I could do it, but it's funner when you do. Self-promote.
So we're available on all the usual podcast streaming. Good Pods, go out there and check that out. We're on Amazon, Google, and Apple Music. Anywhere you can get your podcast. We're on Twitter @ScriptsBad or Instagram Bad Scripts. We're all over Facebook. You basically can't move for us, really. So we'd just love to hear what people think. Get involved. Send us suggestions, what you'd like to hear our characters do in the next season, maybe, and we can maybe incorporate some great ideas from listeners in there. But yeah, if you want a niche podcast, it's a bit different from other stuff that's out there, come and have a listen and join the party.
I think it is. It's niche, but then again, I don't think it's just niche in the sense that you're looking for like a certain kind of crowd, right? If you enjoy storytelling and two friends doing it in script form that they wrote 20 years ago, I think that doesn't have to be I think I could enjoy it. Anybody can enjoy it. I think it's more about just giving it a chance. And I think everybody listening should hop on, find Bad Scripts Podcast, and just have fun and give it a chance, because you nothing to lose. I mean, you will enjoy it.
That's a perfect way of putting it. Thank you.
And I did want to take the last minute here to say thank you for supporting me as well. And obviously we will always have that bond. And I really appreciate you, Steve, and Mike, even though he left us.
Yeah, he's already messaged me to apologize about that to you profusely. But no, again, we are just happy to be members of this great podcasting community, and thank you for being a champion of it. We've massively enjoyed building up an online friendship with you and with everybody else that's in that indie podcast group.
I don't give myself too much credit. You guys deserve it all, and I appreciate it, and we'll definitely stay in touch. Really do appreciate you listening to this episode and checking it out. I hope you continue to do so with the next. I hope you have an appreciation for what I'm trying to do here, highlight all the different things all sorts of different creators are doing. I hope you get behind me on that and continue to join me on my journey. I'm Podcast Father, the Indie Podcaster. See you next time.